Bonjour, comment allez-vous? So this weekend we got UFC Fight Night Paris, Imavov versus Borralho. Fight's finally here, guys and girls. So I'm just gonna get into it. I'm gonna do a quick breakdown of all the fights, starting with the early prelims, going all the way down to the main event. Just giving my perspective as well as my predictions on how I see all of this going, as well as how everyone's doing. So to get everything started, we'd end up starting with a prelim opener of having Miss Shauna Bannon versus Sam Hughes. Um, for this fight, my thoughts are pretty straightforward. I am leaning towards Shannon Bannon for this one. I know that her performances within the UFC kind of leave a certain sense of uncertainty. As in her all her fights, she always looks somewhat as if beatable. She doesn't really seem like a dominant force of what a lot of people would expect from a top level UFC fighter. However, she has consistently won. Like it's at the level at this point that you can't write it off as a fluke or being lucky or anything like that. Her striking is pretty decent for the UFC women's division. As I said, I wouldn't call it top tier, but it is better than most. Like it's effective at the very least. I know Sam Hughes has that grappling wrestling threat, and that could present a real issue for somebody who's a striker like Shauna Bannon, especially even the way how she strikes. A lot of times with her kind of going sideways, sometimes she looks very unsteady and very susceptible to takedowns and even just being knocked off balance. When her previous fight kind of got a little bit ugly, but she won that. And I feel like I've seen a lot of people kind of dismissing and I've seen a lot of people kind of dismissing and disregarding that reality that Shauna Bannon has been winning consistently. It isn't the most dominant of performances, it's not the most dominant of wins, but it has gotten to a point where she knows how to win, and that goes a long way, especially in a division like the women's division. I know strawweight gets a little bit more hot and heavy, so to speak, at the top of the division, like the top five one. You start getting, I know that she's just leaving, but you get the champions like Zhang Wei Li, and you're starting to get former champion Zhang Wei Li, and you get people like Tatiana Suarez. Like it starts getting a lot more grittier and guttier, and that's when and you start seeing more bigger threats and well-roundedness. But not to spend too much time on this, I just don't see Sam Hughes being dominant enough with the grappling wrestling threat to actually overwhelm Bannon. That would make me at least counter out at this point in time. Moving on, we have Andreas Gustafsson versus Renat Fakhretdinov. I know a lot of people, kind of similar to Shanna Bannon, ironically, a lot of people are going against Fakhretdinov. One, because we know that that win over Leal is questionable at best, so to speak. Most of us think that was a robbery, myself included. But just like I just said with Sean Bannon, Fakhretdinov has been consistently winning, and he's even though a lot of those wins are a bit suspicious in the aspect of he's looked very even I'd even argue even more than Sean Bannon, he's looked very susceptible in all of his past fights. Like his last few wins, I'd probably argue his last 3 or 4 wins, he's looked like he could have been the one or should have been the one who ended up on the losing end of those. But that consistency, definitiveness, I just see him as overall a pretty well-rounded fighter that isn't afraid or unwilling to like turn the fight into a clinch fight, regardless of the crowd's reaction, which I personally feel like a lot of UFC fighters get way too easily swayed by the crowd and end up sabotaging their own game in an attempt to quote unquote be entertaining or win the hearts of the crowd. And I've always been a person who believes that the thing that matters the most is winning. Like if you keep winning long enough and often enough, eventually the fans will come around. Like you lose too often, and then no matter how exciting or fun you are, people are going to eventually write you off as a joke. So, as we see with people like Michael Chandler. In this matchup, though, Andreas Gustafsson, very aggressive fighter, very forward going, also has a pretty on him overall. Also has a pretty good record on himself overall. However, I know that he's kind of a perpetual motion machine. He is the type, he keeps going forward. And to be honest, that's actually a pretty bad matchup for Fakardinov, especially when you look at kind of, as I said, he's pretty wayward. He tends to be the fighter that kind of pulls it down by the skin of his teeth a lot of time. And I know that a lot of people would be picking against him in this one due to that, because of Gustafsson's aggressiveness, determination stuff, but that also leaves him open and susceptible. Being too aggressive without having the clean enough technique to go with it can be a bad decision at times. And I think the experience of Fakardinov and just his history, that well-roundedness, as well as the willingness to completely change the tempo of the fight for and to prioritize the win over the entertainment. I just personally think that I see Fakardinov winning this one by decision. By through, to be honest, I see it going as more so of a kind of a clinch grappling fest, like kind of just him constantly switching the tempo of that matchup, switching the tempo of that fight, like kind of stifling Gustafsson's game, just mitigating him and preventing him from really getting off. On the next one, we have Brad Tavares versus Robert Brazek. Um, to be simple with this one, I still Robert Brazek is more or less basically still a newbie to the UFC. I know it's a higher level of competition, but I'm also one of those believers that you don't really see the higher levels of competition until you start getting into people who are like, I'd probably say the top 20 of the division. I personally don't consider Tavares a top 20 or even a top 25 level fighter in the current version of the middleweight division. However, Tavares is experienced. While Tavares has a lot of losses, he's also has a decent amount of wins. Even as you looking at this, you see that Tavares is the one who won his last fight, whereas Bryzek is trying to kind of make up for that loss that he just suffered recently. I know that that's also, there's a lot of factors. That loss is going to play with his psyche coming out in this match. Tavares is not the cleanest or the most technical of fighters. However, he does have a pretty wild, pretty strong punch on him. He also is one of those types. I actually think that Tavares is the type that gets caught up in tempo real easily. Tavares is the type that he'll break the pressure. If you pressure him enough, his entire game will go out the window. He'll change his style. He'll slow down. He'll throw a lot less. He'll become less and less of a threat with just even moderate pressure. But I don't see Bryzek being the person to do that. With this one, it really just comes up to a matchup thing, up to an overall stylistic matchup. I see Bryzek being not strong enough to force his game on Tavares. I see him mentally being a little bit behind as far as just being overly concerned of winning, and more accurate, overly concerned with not losing as opposed to actually trying to get that win. I see Tavares as just not being overall well-rounded enough or dominant enough in any specific specialty that would really allow him to open up his game against Tavares and really be able to crack through his armor a bit. Overall, I just see Bryzek being short, a little short in every category that could possibly get him the win. Whereas I see Tavares, despite being sloppy a bit at technical, whenever the game gets too fast, whenever the fight gets too fast, Tavares ends up becoming sloppier, slower, like overall just a worse quality fighter. But I don't see that threat being present for him with Bryzek, while Tavares still also has that power that could potentially end it at any point and have it shut off. I see this fight being a third round finish for Tavares, or seeing it going as a decision, as see it going as a 29-28 decision, or a third round, I'd say around the late round TKO, late third round TKO. Moving on to the next fight, we got Sam Patterson versus Trey Waters. Um, for this fight, I think it's mildly interesting in the aspect of there's a bit of curiosity on both sides of the fighters. I know that there's a point in time where Trey Waters was kind of envisioned to be the next guy up. That didn't exactly go that way, but I don't think he's. I personally, I see a lot of people kind of writing him off as saying that, yeah, he's not. Well, I don't think that that's truly the case as yet. But I think Patterson overall is just a bit. I think Patterson is just a little bit more adept at dealing with a bit wider variety of styles. I think Patterson is a bit more not in his mindset. I think Patterson is a bit mentally more prepared for this moment, like really kind of attempt to separate himself or at least try to create um, that interest in him and that intrigue. I think Patterson at this point in time, stylistically, I think he's just a better matchup against Trey Waters right now. I think from the striking to the grappling, overall, I just think that Sam Patterson is in a better position to come out winning this one. However, I think that the gap isn't huge. I think Trey Waters is still a constant threat. I think that in this specific matchup, I actually do believe that Trey Waters could potentially knock out Patterson at any point in time. Think it could. I feel like it really is just if there is that one moment within the fight at any point during these 3 rounds, I think that it could majorly swing the momentum from one person to the other. As of right now, I see it ending in decision for Patterson, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trey Waters kind of had a y'all must have done forgot type of performance in this matchup. It wouldn't surprise me. On to next fight. We have Hari Hardwick versus Carl Fernandez. Initially, let me make sure y'all get a good view with that one. We have Hari Hardwick versus Carl Fernandez. Initially, this was supposed to be Fares Ayan. Unfortunately, his grandmother passed away, so he pulled out of the fight earlier this week. My condolences to him and his family. However, with this matchup, I actually don't think there's any. Let me not say any. I don't think there's much hope for Harry Hardwick in this matchup. I've actually really been enjoying Carl Fernandez's recent showings, especially um, that fight when he that recent battle in the Middle East. I think Fernandez had an excellent performance. I know that wasn't that wasn't who the UFC wanted to win. He kind of stole the show a bit in that matchup. I but I think Fernandez is cleaner with the striking. I think he's a bit more rounded fighter. I think he's one. I know a lot of people. I'm actually surprised. I've seen a couple of people consider him boring. I personally enjoy him a lot, but at the same time, I also tend to be a bit biased towards the technicians at times. So perhaps I might be a little bit more too. I might be a little bit too into the actual technique and science behind the fight than the show of it at times. But Fernandez is somebody who I enjoy a lot. I think his striking is really good. I think he's really fast. I think matchup wise, Hardwick just isn't like ready. I don't think he's ready for this level of competition, at least in my opinion. I don't think he's ready for this level of competition. I don't think he's ready for this level of pace. I don't think he's ready for this level of conditioning. I personally just think that he's kind of in a situation he got like and shout out to him and all the respect in the world for coming in and being willing to take on this opportunity. But I just think that this moment is a little bit too well, working out. It's set up to work out way too well for Fernandez. I actually see this ending in a second round TKO on Carl Fernandez's part. I think that's pretty straightforward with my thoughts. We have Mars Intabura versus Ante Delia. In this one, I see a lot of people counting out Tybura. As we know, Tybura is a true veteran of the heavyweight division, one of the most well-rounded fighters within the UFC heavyweight division currently. I'm aware that that's not really saying much, but Tybura doesn't have super fantastic striking or grappling. However, he has good enough to be a legitimate top 15 or top 10 level fighter in the UFC's current heavyweight division. I know that a lot of people are talking about the Legion, talking about him sparring, like even having that experience and those encounters with Tom Aspinall and that guidance. But he's not Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall is a type of generational level heavyweight talent. Undoubtedly, Tom Aspinall generationally is that level of, not individually as a striker or a grappler for the heavyweight division. Aspinall is generational, much less both simultaneously. Whereas, while yes, as we've seen before with people affiliated with Tom Aspinall in the heavyweight division, you kind of you see the fans give some of their expectations for him onto them, but that's not only is that unfair to the fighter, it's also unrealistic, especially once again when you're at the level of talent Aspinall in himself is. In this matchup, Delia coming in to the UFC heavyweight division against Tybura, I personally think it's too early. I think it's too early. I think he needs to be tested a bit more before this level of matchup. I think Tybura is too well rounded. I think he's too experienced. I think that he's too gritty. I think that he's too strong willed. I think that he's too well rounded. I think that he's too physically strong as well. I just think over, and while I know that Delia might be stronger, but when I say strong, I mean when it comes to the heavyweight division, sometimes having that technique of being able to utilize that strength and weight, like even in cases like, to go use the boxing example of Wilder versus Fury 2, when Fury went back to that matchup and really leaning on the Wilder and making him carry his weight, stuff like that. I think Tybura is too familiar and experienced with a diversity of styles within the heavyweight division to not be to be suppressed or overwhelmed by a young contender inexperienced of this level. I think Tybura is actually the one who's a lot more likely to overwhelm him. For me, I see this ending either as a decision or a late round TKO in the third. Moving on to the next one, we have Omar Sy versus Bredson Ribeiro. On paper, Omar Sy should win this fight. He's the more technical fighter. He has the bigger expectations. He has the better record. He's also just overall the better quality fighter. Both of these fighters coming off a loss as well. So he doesn't even have to worry about this guy kind of quote unquote looking down on him, or in both cases, you don't have to really worry about each other having built confidence. They both should kind of come in with that bit of a fire and that desire to like make up for their previous performance. But I think that's where it starts getting away from Sy. You look at Bredson Ribeiro, yeah, on paper, him having a lot more losses with his 8 versus Sy's 1, like becomes a lot bigger of a deal and a bigger indication. But in my opinion, all that does is make excuse me. But in my opinion, all that does is make Bredson Ribeiro actually able to move on easier. It makes it he's a lot more accustomed to the game. He's a lot more accustomed to the ups and the downs. He's mentally capable of kind of putting that back. He isn't He's the one who has the least pressure of the two. He doesn't have to try to make a statement. He's not trying to show out. He's not trying to quote unquote not lose the fans in this one. And then Branson Ribeiro is significantly less technically sound than Omar Sy. But once again, the key word there is technically sound. But he's the more aggressive fighter at times. He's significantly wilder, and I'd argue he's a lot stronger. He's kind of the type. He's kind of that berserker type. He's got that berserker archetype where he'll go in wild swing. He just go forward. He either wins or he loses. He either gets knocked out or knocks you out. Those types are some of the trickiest and most dangerous to deal with, in especially in these type of situations, because not only is Sai coming off that loss, which is going to be a mental hurdle he needs to overcome, but then you have Ribeiro, who is more likely, not only is he more likely to recover from a loss faster and easier, he also has that knockout power. He also has that pressure fighter style where he charges in and let what happens happens. He like that type, because while you may be more technically sound, I don't know how many people have ever trained MMA or any type of combat art, but you know how it is where you have the experienced vet going against the new rookie, and the vet's trying to save, be more technical and stuff, and the rookie is just swinging, doing everything, wilding out, that doing button mashing in real life, doing everything they saw in TV or the UFC, or at least trying to, or whatever they think they have in their head. They're trying to imitate that in real life, and they swing wildly and do error, and they end up catching structure, knocking them off, might knock the wind out of them, like fully catch them off guard. They're harder to read in those moments. Like I think that's Branson Ribeiro in this matchup. Ribeiro throwing the haymakers, going wild, just kind of forcing the action. While on paper, Omar Sy should win this, I'd say fairly easily, but I actually am going with the underdog of Branson Ribeiro in this matchup. I say him by first or second round knockout or TKO. With these two fighters, William Gomez and Robert Richola being the next two, I'm not super versed in either of them. To be honest, I wasn't being too keen to their matches on the regional scene, but in the limited information that I have, and the limited that I've seen, I personally am leaning towards William Gomez. I just think he's overall a more rounded fighter. I think he's a little better of a striker, a little bit faster reaction time. I think a little bit better at fight IQ. I just think he's a little bit better in every area, and I just think in this matchup he'd just be the one who, with the bigger chess match. I just think that in this matchup he's the one who just slightly better attributes in every area. Now we going on to the main card, starting with the main card opener of Patricio Pitbull versus Lucine Queda. I know that, to be blunt, Pitbull hasn't been that impressive since joining the UFC. In his defense, with the pure exceptions of Rainer de Ritter and Michael Venom Page, everyone who's recently joined the UFC from a different organization has honestly been underwhelming at best, and embarrassing at worst, to be honest. But with Pitbull, that initial performance, it was just so slow. It legit just felt like a car. You know, when you're trying to start your car and the engine just keeps cutting off, like, uh. That's what Pitbull kind of felt like. It's like he legit just couldn't properly get started. Like he needed to check the starter. Uh, in his fight coming back against Dan Ige recently, I personally think that it was a decent performance. I think it was, but that's legit. I think it was decent at best. I actually think Dan Ige could have won that fight quite easily if he fought like how he usually does and like up the momentum and pressure. To be honest, I think if this exact same Dan Ige that came in to fight Diego Lopez short notice, I think if that Dan Ige on the same day's notice, that same level of pressure, forward motion, and not giving up, if that version of Dan Ige had fought Pitbull in his last fight, I think he would have damn near knocked him out. Personally, just my opinion. I could be talking crazy right now, but I really believe that's the case. With all that being said, I actually still think Pitbull wins this matchup. I think he's more technical. I think he's getting more comfortable in the UFC. Comparing his first and second fight, it seems as if Pitbull is starting to get his tempo and his pace a little bit better. It definitely also looks like he's starting to develop a lot more comfortability in the cage. MVP himself actually recently had on his podcast and even on others' podcasts in interviews, he revealed that he himself, despite how he fights and how showy he is, felt a lot of pressure with the UFC. Say he kind of underestimated it a lot, and even though a lot of these guys of all these different organizations spar together and train together outside of the octagon and in their respective gyms and stuff like that, but he still kind of felt the pressure of being on the UFC stage, being on the biggest mixed martial arts combat stage in the world, and like having those bright lights and the expectations. So I definitely do believe that that's partially the case with Pitbull. I think Pitbull has a lot of power. I think Pitbull is actually quite technical. I just think that he's really, 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 really slow. Like literally physically, I think he's really, really slow. I think that I think he's slow to start. I think he's slow to get into the tempo. I think he's slow to throw. I think he's slow to move. I think he's slow to adjust. I think he's just slow everywhere. But I think that with his experience, being former champion, that in different organization, that high tempo pace, that power, that high fight IQ, and then that growing and increasing comfortability within the octagon, and then this really fast turnaround. I really respect it. Like genuinely, I'd say that that is another thing that's at least been catching my eye with Pitbull. He's really been up with the activity. He's really kind of showing. I like that he's not one of those guys who's just resting on his laurels, resting on his accolades from a previous organization, or trying to take too much time. He got in. He's decent enough. Like he kind of want to keep going. Like I like that. Yeah, you talked a lot of smack when you first got into organizations, saying that you about to be the new featherweight contender. Everybody expect you like putting everyone on high alert and notice before you even did anything. And you were saying that you genuinely believed that you were going to be the champion and that nobody else was as good as you. Then fight like it. Even outside of just the fight itself, like you see you've been getting some setbacks. You lost a fight that you feel like you shouldn't have and that you felt like you should have fought better. You won a fight that you felt like you should have performed better. All right, get right back in there. Don't allow us to forget about you. Don't allow us as the fans to categorize you as just another fighter from another organization who just end up being another disappointment. So I like, excuse me, but I like the fact that Pitbull is being on it with that. I like that. So it's very respectable, very very commendable. We love to see it. No, we got Axel Sola versus McKee. Let me see if I can. There we go. That's a little bit better. I know it took until we got to the main card for me to better show that, but better late than never, right? But we have Axel Sola versus Rice McKee. In this one, overall, I'm going with McKee. Personally, I think he got a bit better of a grappling advantage in this one. I know, but I think he has a better grappling advantage. I think he's more experienced This is Sola's debut. I think there's going to be more pressures with it. Your debut on the main card, you got those expectations. Um, I'd like to see how this matchup goes. I think overall McKee is the winner of this one, but we'll see what happens. But I think that it might just be little bit too much for a newcomer. Wouldn't be surprised if he had a show out moment, especially with like the quality of newcomers we've been having recently. We'll see if Sola is also one of these high quality newcomers. But just off my initial thoughts and impressions, I just kind of think it's going to be a bit of a schooling by the veteran. We got Bolaji Oki versus Mason Jones. Um, Look at those muscles. Somebody been in the gym, like not the MMA gym, like the weight gym. All jokes aside, though, I think Oki is just stronger power puncher. Um, I think that I don't think that he's super crazy technical or anything like that, but I do think he's gonna land, and I think he's gonna land eventually. And I think in this specific matchup, there isn't a big enough difference in skill. I don't think the skill gap is big enough where I'd be like Jones schools him or Jones just outclasses him and outshows him. Um, I just think Oki's gonna throw, Oki's gonna land, and Jones is gonna go out. Gone. I don't see it happen immediately, but I see it happening eventually. I'd say late second round TKO or early third round TKO. Moving on, we got Modestas Bukauskas versus Paul Gregg. Modestas Bukauskas versus Paul Craig. I think I said Paul Gregg. What's wrong with me? But I like Paul Craig. Paul Craig is always a fun individual. He's always a fun character. Like great warrior spirit, great veteran, but old old fighter. When I say old, I don't mean age. I mean style. Like Paul Craig fights like he's from the previous generation. Like he back then when it was you specialize in a specific area and then you got good enough that you just dominated people from other areas. Before the fight game was as well rounded as it is currently, I don't see that working anymore. Unless you're just overwhelmingly just that much, unless you're like that much better, like super overwhelmingly in comparison to everyone else. Like I don't see that happening. Like it, uh, it and no, at this point in time, it's rare to just see anybody who is that overwhelmingly better than everybody else that they could just close it out. I don't see I don't see Paul Craig's, and not only that, with Paul Craig's experience, with Paul Craig being around for as long as he has and doing the same thing for as long as he has, I think everyone knows like the secret's out. Everyone knows the game plan. He's gonna have shit striking, shit striking. Right. My striking is probably better than Paul Craig's, respectfully. Yeah, he's gonna have shit striking. He's gonna have a mean body kick, which he's gonna try to lull you into it, get a distance. If that, and then he'll try to at least have you curl up a little bit with that. That doesn't work. Then he'll charge at you, try to get the game to the ground, try to get into the grappling realm, and then he submit you. We all know Paul Craig, even now, is still a major grappling and submission threat. But the game is no longer at a point where that is enough. You need to be able to strike. You need to. Yeah, you need it. Paul Craig does not have that. It's unfortunate, but it's a huge hole in his game that has never improved. And at this current stage in the game where everyone is so well rounded that even the people who aren't well rounded are just not well rounded in comparison to other people who are more well rounded. Everybody can strike, everybody can grapple. The people who can't grapple, it's not that they can't grapple, they just can't grapple as well. People who can strike, it's not that they can't strike, they just can't strike as well. We just watched Aljamain Sterling, somebody who was known for his shit striking, put on damn near a striking masterclass against Brian Ortega, who was out here striking with Yair Rodriguez, somebody who was actually known for his striking and knockout powers. Yeah, it went to the grappling, and that's how he won. But still, like he wasn't out here just getting outclassed in the striking at that point. Can't say the same for when he fought Diego Lopez, though. So, saying all that to say that in this era, I can't pick Paul Craig over anybody who I don't consider to either just be a very unevolved fighter or just a straight up bum. But besides that, I don't really see myself choosing Paul Craig in any like legitimate matchup. And that just so with that, I see Bukaskas just overwhelming him with not just well roundedness, but Bukaskas just is a lot stronger, a lot more power punching, a lot a lot better. I know that people always say like 90% of fights go to the ground, but 100% of fights start standing up. And if Bukaskas can control the distance, he literally has equal height, he has equal reach, and his leg reach is only an inch shorter. If Bukaskas can maintain distance, pressure Craig, and then catch him, his lights out. It's night. I see this as a first round stoppage. Maybe early second round. On to the co-main event. We got Benoit Saint Denis versus the Fighting Nerds' Mauricio Huffy. There was a point in time that Benoit Saint Denis was supposed to be the next guy. I remember when him and Poirier fought, he was kind of supposed to be. It was in that era where it was all the old versus the new. You had Gaethje versus Fiziev, Poirier versus BSD, and then Oliveira went against Sarukian, and Oliveira was the only one that fell short in that quote unquote attempt at the changing of the guard. But within this matchup, Saint Denis lost that, and then he had that horrible loss to Moicano. Moicano basically took him down and beat him silly. However, in this current matchup, this current iteration, I, to be blunt, I don't see why there are so many people who are picking Saint Denis in this matchup. I don't get it. Mauricio Huffy, very technical striker. The Fighting Nerds as a group are like some of the most well-rounded fighters. Like as a group, some of the most well-rounded fighters that we've seen UFC. Like even when you go back to things like Team Alpha Male and even Team Habib, when you look at them, it's rare for fighters to be like this well-rounded as the majority of them seem to be, and even how they seem to influence others. Mauricio Huffy being one of the most creative strikers in that group, and I know that he's primarily known as a striker. And for some reason, I really hate how fans have this notion that getting tired means that you have cardio issues. I see fans do that with everybody. The moment you start breathing heavy, oh my God, these cardio issues. I don't know how many of you guys have ever been sparring or in any combat sport, whether you wrestled or boxing or taekwondo, karate, whatever, but you get tired. The shit's exhausting. You get tired after the first 30 seconds. You start breathing heavy. You are literally trying to use your force to dominate another individual while they're using their force to not only stop yours, but to do the same to you. Not only is it taxing physically, it's super taxing mentally. It's a very exhausting thing. Any normal individual will get tired eventually, except for Marab. But besides that, everybody else will get tired eventually. It doesn't make sense that the moment just because he fights and get tired, and then even the examples he use, he was tired against Lantop. Of course, he was tired against Lantop. He's showing throwing straight super power pressure. He's pressuring him the whole time. He's countering the whole time. All his shots were lethal. He would have knocked out a less heavy man much sooner. Lantop was 10 pounds overweight and still was getting knocked on his butt multiple times, getting dazed, getting beat up. Like his willingness to go forward was Lantop's willingness to keep going forward was the only thing, because even mentally getting beat literally in a bloody mess like that would put most people down. With Saint Denis has bad striking, to be blunt. He has bad striking but great aggression. Like he makes up for his technicality with just forward momentum, which is like a worse version of Caio Borralho, ironically, which we'll get to in the main event. But he'll make up for a lot of the actual technical aspects of it with just determination, aggression, forward motion, which is great. And but the thing is, being a pressure fighter, it doesn't work against Huffy based off what we've already seen. As I just said with the Lantop example, Lantop kept going forward, kept attempting, kept throwing, kept being determined, and he kept getting countered. He was countered in the pocket. He was countered at distance. He was tagged forward. Like he was knocked down. He was constantly on alert. And then even when you do things we saw with the recent Bobby Green performance, he has excellent setups and distance management because he baited Bobby in that moment, made him think the hand was coming through the kick at the perfect distance that just got the tip of the temple to fully have him discombobulated. Simple as that. Huffy's fight IQ is incredibly high. His technical skill is incredibly heavy. And with BST's biggest advantage would be the grappling and the wrestling. I know a lot of people are saying, well, we don't know Huffy. Not knowing something is not the same thing as it is being a negative. This isn't credit. People have to stop. People treating it like credit card bureaus. Bad when they say having no credit is the same as having bad credit. Having no knowledge of Huffy's Huffy's proficiency in the grappling does not then mean that Huffy is not proficient in the grappling, and it doesn't just mean that Huffy is now weak in the grappling. We cannot say for certain that Saint Denis even has a genuine advantage in the grappling. I'll say this though, when I look at the grappling skills of the rest of the Fighting Nerds team, the main Fighting Nerds, mind you, they're all primarily strikers. But when you look at the actual grappling skill of the rest of the, all of them are good to great grapplers. We just saw Jean Silva submit Bryce Mitchell despite being an incredible striker. We've seen Carlos Prates with excellent like grappling defense when people tried to change levels on him, or try to change levels and try to pressure him with no difficulties, and his comfortability in those areas. We've seen like Caio Borralho be the one to initiate the grappling and the wrestling, and with his blast double, we've seen all of these things. So I don't see why now everyone is immediately saying doesn't believe that Huffy himself would also have decent grappling, if not decent grappling defense at worst. All in all, I see Saint Denis trying to do what he did with Poirier and it ending the same way. I.e., I see Saint Denis trying to pressure Huffy and try to get him out of there early and try to overwhelm him and just getting countered, not being discombobulated, knocked out guard, knocked dizzy, knocked down, then knocked out. I see this as a first or second TKO for Mauricio Huffy. I don't really see like based off what I see now, I don't really see Saint Denis being a credible threat to Mauricio Huffy at this point. And finally, we got the main event. We got Nassourdine Imavov versus Caio Borralho. I've done an entire breakdown video of how these two match up against each other. So Please go ahead and check that out. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. But just to give us a quick summary of it, I see these two heads being incredibly similar to each other. Incredible matchups. You see that they have similar. Yeah, Imavov is 2 inches taller, but if you ever been beside somebody who's 2 inches taller than you, that's not that big of a difference. They have similar weight. They have identical reach. They have identical leg reach. They're both striker grapplers. Imavov is with wrestling, Borralho with grappling. I think their striking nullifies and pacifies each other, meaning I don't think either of them can gain advantage with grappling. At best, I think that they can just slow down the tempo to kind of try to buy some time. The rest, after that, I think they both are really good strikers, as I had hinted to when I was speaking about the Saint Denis pressure situation. I think Imavov is the cleaner, more technical, sharper striker. I think Borralho is the grittier, more determined, more forward-going striker. I think Borralho got more better dirty boxing, whereas Imavov is a much more of a technician of the two. I see this being primarily a striking battle. I think with the grappling nullifying each other and then both being pressure fighters, they'll both try to force forward. I think that Borralho is the better at pressure fighter at pressuring specifically. However, when it comes to actual effectiveness of forcing the opponent to go backwards, I think Imavov is going to be the one who does better in this one. Because I think that with it being a striking battle, Imavov and them having identical reaches, meaning they're always in range of each other. If they can hit the other, then they can get hit by the other. So, and with that being the case, I see Imavov being faster. I see Imavov being sharper. I see Imavov being more technical. And with this being gonna most likely gonna end up being a striking battle, I just see Imavov landing more cleaner. I see Imavov landing cleaner more often and harder due to it being cleaner. I see Imavov landing cleaner more often, harder. And I just think it's just going to be a matter of time before Caio ends up just more or less just being a bit overwhelmed. I think Caio, once again, is too good and too similar to just get outclassed. I think Caio will make up for, Caio will basically equal out some of that sharpness of Imavov by just being grittier and making it a lot more dirty of a fight. However, in those specific avenues, I see in those specific avenues, the most I see happening is that the pace and tempo of the fight changing, it end up being switched up and everything. Basically, Caio able to slow it down. So I basically see Caio to present a challenge, probably get a couple of advantage matchups here and there. Caio is better at fighting backwards, so that's also another thing where I see Caio being better at fighting backwards even though Imavov is able to go forward, he's still going to be that threat, and they both got that power behind them. But I don't see either being that much better than the other that they can get a clean knockout unless a mistake is made on either party's part. And I see Imavov just overwhelming him by just being the better striker and a good enough grappler to equal him out. See this one ending in that 48-47 decision to Nassourdine Imavov, making him the certified #1 contender in the division. Well, guys, that was it. That was my breakdown of UFC Fight Night Paris, Imavov versus Borralho. Y'all leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. Let me see some of your guys' thoughts. Hope you guys have a great day. Everyone stays blessed. Have a wonderful evening. Au revoir.